Are you finished beating around the bush? Are you finished with your meandering intro right there?
I tell you what I watched last night. Have you seen the documentary on Buster Keaton on Turner Classic Movies, The Great Buster?
No, I have to see if that's going to be replayed. I'll definitely DVR that. I am a big fan of Buster Keaton. It
was not a debut because I've actually seen it before, but it was on again last night. Peter Bogdanovich did it, and he narrates it and the whole 9 yards. And
he's a bit of a nut.
Well, but he did a good job here. He did even sooner or later. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut. Peter Bogdanovich did a good job here. But it was on last night on Turner Classic Movies, and some great old footage. Not only that, but some rare stuff, and some it concentrated a certain segment of the program on his TV work in the 50s and early. Well, I guess, mid to late 50s and maybe early 60s. I forget what year he passed away. 66, he passed away. Where he kind of experienced a renaissance when he was on the outs for so many years when, everybody had forgotten about him. And then all of a sudden he's doing commercials and he's doing these TV shows. And besides the fact that he was not only a comedic genius and a filmmaker, he invented a lot of the tropes, as the young folks call them, that you saw in comedy and in cinema and in motion pictures for the next 50 years. But what a fucking bump taker. You go back and you see the silent movies. He did all that, all the shit that he did, he really did. They obviously used some trick photography and some camera tricks, and he wasn't necessarily always on the top floor of a 45-story building, but he was taking those bumps and doing that shit because he was a performer in vaudeville from the time he was born. His parents were in vaudeville and they made him part of the act. He became the star of the act. But bumps that none of the boys could take, and fucking physical comedy. And then where I was going with that was when they showed some of his TV work in the 50s, he could still outrun some of the younger people that he was interacting with. He wasn't taking bumps like that anymore, but also just the incredible coordination and the physical skill. I've always said all of the boys, instead of watching Japanese tapes, they ought to watch the fucking silent movie comedians and actually all great comedians, and especially the great vaudeville comedians. There's a ton of Jackie Gleason and Jerry Lawler. But you learn more about body language and portraying an emotion and reacting to something in a big fashion. If you're in a big building with 10 or 15,000 people, the overreaction and just the timing. They had a clip from Candid Camera, which for the youngsters out there was the first hidden camera pranked show that from the 50s. The host was Alan Funt, and they would hide cameras and get people's reactions to off the wall shit. Obvious, same thing as they do today, just more primitive technology. And they had a shot. They did a gag with Buster Keaton in a diner where he's dressed up as an old man, which he was, but he's an old bum. You can't tell who he is, right? And he's sitting next to people at the counter of this diner. And he's doing business. He goes to pepper his soup, and the top falls off the pepper shaker, and all the pepper goes in the soup. Well, goddamn, when he tries to catch the top of the pepper shaker, his wristwatch comes off and falls in the soup. Well, he gets that and dries the wristwatch off with some napkins, and he doesn't want anybody to see that happened. So he puts the napkins in his jacket pocket to hide them, but when he bends over sideways, he gets a whiff of the fucking pepper and he sneezes and his goddamn toupee falls off his head into his fucking soup. And these people are dying laughing because you can't tell somebody is doing a performance here. It's so natural. It's effortless. It looks completely legitimate because he'd done it for 60 years. And that's working. Instead of convincing people that he was in the middle of a fight, he's convincing people that he was having a series of incredible, stupid, funny shit happen to him that you couldn't see through, that he was putting it on for your benefit. And everybody, I've always said, you don't laugh if an old man carrying groceries on a icy street gets out in the middle and looks left and looks right to make sure people are paying attention to him, and then throws the bag up and falls on purpose. You only laugh if it's accidental. If he fucking paralyzes himself, then you'll quit laughing. But people taking fucking funny bumps is funny. But not if they're doing it on purpose. So there's a lesson there to the budding wrestling generation. Watch fewer Japanese tapes and more silent movie comedians, and you'll learn more shit.
He broke his neck doing a stunt in a film.
Well, actually, he broke his neck on a stunt, and they took him to the doctor and said, "Oh, how many previous times have you broken your neck?" And he said, I didn't know I had. "Oh, yes, you have. A number of times." And he was still doing that shit. He was like one of the boys. But the thing is, the reason why I like Keaton better than Chaplin, even better than, Laurel and Hardy were silent comedians as well as sound. But of all, Harold Lloyd, I never got.
I love Harold Lloyd.
Well, you like French toast.
His movies are genius. You can't watch those movies and tell me they're not brilliant.
But you can't watch Keaton and tell me not only was he a genius, but he was doing everything. He was coming up with the shots. He was directing the motion picture. He was writing it as they went along. He was coming up with gags. He was starring in it. And just the dedication that he had when he started working for Fatty Arbuckle. He had never been involved in movies before. This was in like 1916, 1917. By 1920, he's a star. He's doing all that thing. He's got his own studio. And he's taking the cameras apart and putting them back together to see how they work, which is how he was able to do all the trick photography and figure that out and play all the roles in some of the scenes in his pictures. But so not only was he a great bump taker and a great worker, but he knew that the way to make money was to get in the office and be either the booker or the promoter, because he did that too. He was one of the highest paid people in movies in the 20s. And then, of course, sound came in, and also he signed up with he signed up with the WWE as sound came in because he was married to one of the Talmadge sisters. And he'd had his bird's nest on the ground with his own production company, but instead he signs with MGM because of his marital relations, and they WWE'd him. They bad bookinged him right out of business, and he was on the periphery of movies for 20 years.
See, I love Buster Keaton. I actually got to see Seven Chances live with a band playing the music, not an orchestra, but a band. A few years back at the Nighthawk in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and was fantastic. Big fan of his films. Harold Lloyd not only did his own stunts, not only had thrills mixed in with the comedy, but he also blew off half of his hand.
Well, that's true.
So whenever you see him hanging off the clock or all the various things, he's wearing a fake hand because he blew off, I think, was it 3 fingers or 2 fingers? I forget.
Maybe 2.5. We'll split the difference.
And he ended up better off than Keaton. I guess you could argue maybe him or Chaplin, but he owned all of his own masters. He became a really successful guy with a ton of real estate after the talkies. I mean, he did a few films after that.
Besides that, he actually transitioned for a few years there to talkies and did well, but he had that giant house, the mansion, and Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, but poor old Buster. You feel sorry for the underdog. That's a theme we're going to talk about here on the program. You feel sorry for the underdog. What a revolutionary concept. They ought to apply it to wrestling sometime.
He has the best face.
You feel sorry for the underdog.
That face. Just when the camera shows that face. He never smiles. He's never happy. He's always a guy struggling through life. And I'm kind of with you. There are things I like. Gold Rush or whatever. Modern Times. but I've never gotten as into Chaplin as I did Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd.
Yeah, what was it? Was it W.C. Fields called him the goddamn ballet dancer?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Chaplin, a little much. It was a little much for me. Just the same thing over and over. I know he was a genius and everything, but I like the common man, Buster Keaton, and Fields. Here's the thing. Also, Fields was never a silent film star because he couldn't. As he was the biggest star in vaudeville. He was the biggest star on Broadway in the 1900s and teens. He traveled all over the world. He was the world's most famous juggler at one point. Then when he started doing the Follies and George White Scandals, all the big Broadway reviews, he was the biggest star on Broadway, but he made a couple of silent films. It just didn't translate. When he actually got a chance to talk and do his whole thing, that's when he became a star. But that was the last 10 good years of his life. When he was sick for the last few years of his life, didn't make any more real starring pictures. But so he was too old. You get a little bit of his juggling, but he was too old and he'd been drinking too long at that point to do the juggling shit that he was really famous for in the pictures. But he reinvented himself and came up with a totally new gimmick, which was more true to life or true to heart. I'm
a massive Marx Brothers fan. I've never heard you talk about them. What do you think?
I like them. I like the Marx Brothers. I think that their early films, even though they are classic, they're more of a filmed version of their Broadway plays.
And the first couple of films, yeah.
The first couple, because it was 1929, 1930, 31. It was very primitive to begin with, whether they were on a soundstage in Astoria or whatever.
To be fair, though, the first few films they made were film adaptations of their Broadway plays.
Yes, no, but I mean technically. They're a little, a lot of the, you got to have musical numbers and breaking things up and everything. I like when they hit the groove with Night at the Opera, Day at the Races, that type of thing. We still had to have the musical number every now and then, but we got more movies out of it.
What about Duck Soup?
Duck Soup was Duck Soup was my favorite probably of the early stuff.
I always liked Monkey Business. That was the first one I ever saw, so that one has a special place in my heart.
Heart. Have you ever seen String Bean? On Hee Haw. Why are we talking about Hee Haw now?
I never watched Hee Haw. I never even
on Hee Haw when they'd have the segment where they'd all be sitting around and String Bean would read a letter from home. And he'd say, I keep it right here next to my heart. He'd grab his chest pocket and it wasn't there. Heart. He'd grab his stomach. Heart. He'd grab his hip. And finally, heart. He'd pull it out of his back pocket.
You like Hee Haw. Do you like Laugh-In?
I liked Laugh-In.
Because Hee Haw's like the southern version of Laugh-In, isn't it?
Well, okay, loosely. But there was a lot more music and things and such carrying on Hee Haw. But I liked Laugh-In, especially Goldie Hawn. I was a Goldie Hawn fan.
I like Judy Carn.
And yeah, she was Judy Carn. She was all right. Goldie, I liked Goldie. All right, what do you got?
We've gone down a path I don't know how to get back from.
Where have we gone?
So how about March of the Wooden Soldiers? What do you think?
Hey, that's the first Laurel and Hardy movie that I saw. And that made me a fan.
It's a tradition here in New York I want to say they do it on Thanksgiving now and Christmas. After the Yule log on Christmas, Channel 11 plays March of the Wooden Soldiers. Barnaby. Yeah, no, they play it every single year, and
I love the heel music.
I like the bootleg Mickey Mouse. I don't know if they put like a small monkey in a mouse outfit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's violating all sorts of animal cruelty laws today. But there's just this bootleg Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney must have lost his mind when he saw that movie.
Oh, and there's something. If they ever do a remake, there's a way to get Marco Stunt into motion pictures.
Disney did a remake, Babes in Toyland. It's in color, so it's probably in the mid-'60s. Annette Funicello was in it.
That's right. Because, well, it's from the same nursery rhyme.
Yes.
Yes.
Mother Goose is actually, I think, the host of that movie. The movie begins with Mother Goose.
Yeah, but then Laurel and Hardy they're living in the shoe in a spare room from the old lady who lived in the shoe, right? They're renting a room out.
Right. They're renting a room from the old lady who lives in a shoe. And little Bo Peep has issues, and
she didn't have issues. She had subscriptions.
She didn't have issues. She had tissues. But no, great movie. Great movie. Like I said, every year I make sure I make time to watch it.